friend of the podcast, Nate Jones, NBA agent, entrepreneur, move insoles. We are discussing business stuff in our intro right now. Big bad business stuff right now. Could I go to a Dick's Sporting Goods locally and buy some product, or is this mostly in LA or somewhere else?
There's 81 doors that we're at least in 50 plus now, but there's 81 doors that we're rolling out into. We're at least in 26 doors to start, and we're rolling into 81 total. They had just added 55 more doors at the end of the year. So we're working on putting up a map for everyone so that they know what stores we're in and all that stuff. But the hope is within the year that we'll be in 500 plus Dick's Sporting Goods stores.
Got it. I need to buy some basketball shoes. I'm starting my son on basketball, and I feel a little bit embarrassed that I've really not exposed him to any of it. And I realize that it will look a certain way if he just doesn't know anything out there. Maybe it shouldn't. I don't know if anybody knows anything about me or my background, but I was just starting to feel that last night at the basketball practice going, man, I should have built a hoop outside or got him doing something. It was just a situation where he never really gravitated to it, and I didn't want to push him in that direction either and make that the thing he has to do. But last night I was going, man, I gotta do something. I gotta get a hoop. We can't be embarrassed out here as Strausses.
Yeah, I was born in 81, and I got my first outdoor hoop at 80, like Christmas 86. And honestly, I didn't really get into basketball until 1990. So, like that 8-9-year-old range is when I feel like that's when kids really figure out, because I didn't play any little league, anything at all. I didn't play sports, organized sports, really until high school. But I had always had, I don't know what your neighborhoods are like, but our neighborhoods had games and pickup runs and all that stuff going on. But I feel like, how old is your son now?
6.
Yeah. So he's creeping up, and probably in like two to 3 years, you're going to really know, like, oh, he's interested in this. Like, he likes this. He wants to watch the games. He wants to play. And that's probably when you're going to have to get that outdoor hoop for sure.
Well, there's that other weird thing too, where the coach, really serious minded guy, and I don't want to divulge too much about my personal life, but he's got opinions about how you do things. And I think when he was showing how to dribble, it was true. You can't do it with the palms of your hands. You've got to have the splayed fingers. Yeah. But my son, for whatever reason, he takes that jump shot like Reggie Miller. He's got one foot in front of the other, and he's correcting my kid on it. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't know. Maybe this guy is correct, breaking the kid's form down. But have we done a study on this? Do we know that this is the exact right way to do it? The body is very mysterious, Nate. There are people who can do things the wrong way right. So that was one thought where I was going, I don't know. I don't know if I go with that.
Your body is oftentimes smarter than we think. I mean, you see, not to get too deep into this, but I think about like Lonzo Ball, for instance. I remember watching him after his rookie year, walking in the tunnel in then Staples Center. And I said to the person that was with me, dude, his gait is jacked up. Like I won't be surprised if he has knee issues or something in the future. Fast forward years later, he has those issues. And I think a lot of it was probably connected to that. But then you remember how he used to shoot before he had a shot doctor fix his shot, and he was like pulling it from it was almost like he wasn't able to get power into his hips. So he had to out of his hips. So he had to pull it and shoot it that way. And he just continued to do it all this time. And you connect the dots and you're like, oh, he probably had some gait issue that no one ever addressed. No one ever talked about. And he figured out how to make the shot work for him. Look, I've never gotten, anything from his trainers or, from the athletic trainers of the teams or anything like that. But just from, novice looking at him, and when between seeing his gait when I was watching him walk off the court his rookie year and seeing that funky shot he had, and then finding out years later that his knee issues were probably connected to all that stuff. It's just interesting to see that he figured out a shot that worked for him as a kid. Obviously they had to fix it when he got to the NBA, but he had a funky shot that got him to Division I basketball into the NBA. because that's what he needed to do for his body, right?
Well, and similar, exactly the same with my son. No, I don't know. I think that at this age, lanky, the core is weak, and that's why it's the 1 foot in front of the other foot.
Yes.
And that's what it is, because when it was corrected, all of a sudden the ball is flying like it's Wild Thing at the beginning of Major League, and it's just a bit outside. And maybe it's smart to do it the right way, and maybe at this age you just want to see the ball go through the hoop. And I don't know, but certain dads are very opinionated on what to do, and they're not professional necessarily, so you just kind of go with it. And I don't want to intervene. It's just not that important to me, Nate, frankly. I don't need him to be a D1 player. I don't know if that's really going to be in the cards of it. So yeah.
I don't know if I would love basketball as much as I do if I had someone like, the super dad that's like trying to be the coach and telling you have to do this and run drills and whatever. I just fell into it because I liked it. Like no one was telling me to like it. I liked it versus it being this thing where your dad's living vicariously through you and trying to push you to college basketball, the NBA. I don't know if I would actually. Yeah.
I just want him to pay attention, do what he's told. Later on, you can freelance and be somebody like myself. But the ancient Roman proverb of before you can lead, you must follow. I'm just trying to get the follow down. But there was a funny interaction. And this is as much as they'll say about it, because I am a little bit wary this day and age of divulging too much about family and what's said.
As you should be.
As I should be. But this, I think, is anodyne enough that it's okay to share. At some point, the coach told him to do something. My son did it, and the coach said, perfect. And my son said, and I don't know why this is lodged in his head, he said, there's no such thing as perfect. And the coach says, yes, there is. Just really sternly, yes, there is.
That's your son right there for sure. He's living in the gray area. So I love it.
I don't know. I have no idea. I just want him to do what he's told. It's like I'm all about authoritarianism and conformity when it comes to him, as opposed to whatever I'm living through, where I go, do what you're told, never question.
Exactly.
At least at this phase. I wanted to have you on, Nate, because, well, for a variety of reasons. Number one is because I always like having you on. And the second one, I am finding it difficult to generate content this week personally, writing wise, and I'm writing about it right now. And I realized it's the vibe shift, man. I think that's what it is. I was in Vegas watching football, but there's a lot of the inauguration stuff. And I don't think Trump winning really made things any more complicated as far as whatever perspective I might have and I'm communicating. But the actual taking of power, the actual, the government is different now, how it seems as though in the culture, nobody knows what the culture is right now. There's a sense of a massive change, but nobody knows. And I find it to be a confusing moment to navigate. I'm a little bit at a loss. So when I'm a little bit at a loss, I'll just talk about being at a loss and we'll find the next thing. But I think you were tweeting some things to that effect. I'm looking for one of them. You tweeted somebody saying, there's a clear cultural shift happening, whether you like it or not. Progressivism failed. Most people are going back to the 90s era liberalism. The loud fringe on here doesn't hold that much power anymore. Would you like to expand on that, Nate? And additionally, do you feel a little bit as I do? Just a little bit at sea, wondering what's up? Where are we headed? What's going on?
That actually was not my tweet. I just retweeted it and agreed with it. No,
I'm saying you retweeted it. I know. I said that, sir.
Oh, my bad. My bad, brother. My bad.
How dare you? At least I think I did. I don't know. I'm back from Vegas. I might not have. Who knows? Somebody listening will know. I'm a little scared. I'm a little scared of my listeners. I pronounced Hawaii the wrong way and defended it, and they crushed me. So they've got me seeing ghosts out here. But continue.
Yeah, that's like half the content with Andrew Sharp and Ben Thompson's Sharp Tech blog is just, podcast is just users telling them how they pronounce something the wrong way. But yeah, I actually, maybe I'm going to get killed for this, but I just I have no feeling about any of this right now. Like I'm just like, I see it going on, but I've gone through the circus already. Right. So I experienced 2016 where everyone was like, oh, it's the end of the world. Yeah. This is going to happen. Trump is Hitler. He's, whatever else. And to say that I was more susceptible to those beliefs during that time, I would, being 100% transparent, I probably was. Definitely wasn't on the full crazy left side.
Can I just interject real quick? Because I will defend people being destabilized back then. The idea of like Trump being in power now is much more, let's say, imaginable, if that's a word, than it was back then. And back then, the overriding assumption among, let's say, the elites and everybody else was that he was going to lose. And so it was this sort of crazy novelty. And then that night, you're going, this guy is in charge of the nuclear arsenal. I think sometimes I understand why conservatives have a lot of issues with how Trump's been reacted to and oftentimes misrepresented in legacy media sources, but maybe they also don't give enough, let's say, leash to people, especially back then, of being a little bit, oh my God, what's going to happen? This is the most powerful man on earth. But yes, continue.
Yeah, there's a major difference between someone that is like off the wall, which I would say Trump is, he is a unique character. He's a funny ass dude. He's a unique character, and he says whatever comes to mind, right? So there's that aspect of it. There's an aspect of the presidency where he is, when you're talking about setting the table for being an example of how people should interact with each other. I used to feel like that was the part of the job of being the presidency. Of being the president. And Trump's kind of just thrown that out the window. He doesn't give a fuck. He's going to talk to people. It doesn't matter who it is, what circumstance it is. If it's a disabled person and he wants to make fun of them, he's going to do it. Like he just does not care. Right. It's almost like he's like a comedian in a lot of ways, like his approach to how he takes public speaking. Right. But back then in 2016, I was probably not probably, for sure, more nervous than I am now. And then you had that shift in 2020 where it's like, oh yeah, we've shifted to this new liberal medium, and everything that we've been preaching about and everything that we're going to have, everything that we've been saying needs to be changed. And we almost got the exact opposite hammer of being told, this is the way the world should be. If you don't think this way and operate this way, you're obviously a bad person. Yeah. And everything is very black and white in regards to that. And now we've seen almost a complete rejection of that. So it's interesting to me to see what that rejection actually means. Does it mean that we want full on Trumpism, or did we just want to get rid of that 2020, early 2020 era stuff that came in with Biden that was somewhat represented by Kamala? Is it just a rejection of that, or is it an embrace of everything that Trump represents?
Well, that's the wild thing about it, because Trump had a resounding victory. He went 7 for 7 in the battleground states, but it wasn't a landslide on the level of the 2 Obama elections.
Yes.
And yet out the gate immediately, it feels like there is a bigger shift and a bigger shift in power. We'll see how the executive orders hold up. There's this sense that institutions were being run according to certain orthodoxy with DEI and these other standards that were informing the culture. And now from the top down, the government is saying that is all over. It is completely different. It didn't feel like that when Obama took over, even when he had the supermajority in the Senate. It just felt, oh my God, the Democrats are in charge and they're going to try to pass health care. And then it gets all bogged down and somehow maybe pleases some people, but not people overall in a way. And certainly in the second election, it didn't feel like there was any sort of change, which I guess makes some sense because the same guy won again. But this is this different sense that this is a new period in American history where suddenly the conversations are new. The Overton window has been massively altered. Certain topics that you weren't supposed to even question are now up for debate or up for correction. And it just feels dramatic in a way that I cannot remember it feeling dramatic. In a way, it wasn't dramatic when he won the first time, because when he won the first time, there was a sense of, yeah, he won, but he doesn't actually have a team to navigate these waters out there in Washington. And that was largely the case. I think there was more, there was just more wrangling and infighting and everything else. And right now with Elon Musk and some other people and more legitimacy, it feels like an actual regime change.
Yeah, and I mean, I know you brought up the Obama aspect and not feeling like, even though he had a super majority, that you didn't feel this like vibe shift like that. I think number one, Obama is just generally more of a pragmatist and just not a guy that wields power, right? Like that just was it. That's his approach, even though he had a super majority. And then there's the aspect of, Dems bad, Republicans good, Dems good, Republicans bad, that we would hear during that time. But when it came to healthcare, even though they had the super majority, you still saw a fight back because we didn't want that. Powers that be did not want that full on shift in healthcare the way that it was originally presented to us. We had to have that baby step. So I think between the pragmatism and, I don't know if you want to say corporate powers that be when it comes to healthcare, that aspect of it kind of made slight changes and not what everybody was expecting. When it comes to Trump, that motherfucker does not care. He has no problem wielding power. He enjoys feeling like he's the man in charge, and it doesn't have to be a collaborative process, even though behind the scenes, a lot of this stuff has to be collaborative. He has to bring other people in and lean on other people to for anything to work in the United States government. Otherwise, it's just, it's a foolhardy executive order that can get overturned very quickly, right? But I think he has his personality of having zero problem wielding power and not caring. He does care what people think about him because he responds negatively to anyone that says puts any kind of slight publicly to him. He's going to remember it and call you out about it. But I guess what I'm saying is it's not going to stop him from doing what he wants to do. And I think that's the difference. And I don't know exactly what that means long term. Maybe it's just early out the gate. He's swinging for the fences and he's going to get tired and bored of all this stuff eventually, right? But I think I'm similar to you where I can't really put a pulse to it, and I honestly just haven't. My mind has not been there, and I'm not caught up in this. I don't want to label people Trump deranged folks or Trump derangement, having Trump derangement syndrome. But me personally, I'm just not sitting here worrying about it the way that, was preached to us to worry about those things. Yeah. I mean, whenever somebody is president of the United States, it can go disastrously and a lot of people can die. That's just the scale of the job. Yes. And Trump has had this odd scorpion and the frog dynamic with various things that he has been involved in the past. So I wouldn't fault somebody for thinking it's going to go poorly or being a pessimist about it, I should say. But it just feels strange. It just feels like it's a much different situation where if the Democrats had won, if they had won, this is what I'm saying. If they had lost in 2020, yes, as Trump feels that they had, and there's this just irony on irony. If he had gotten his way, which was the thing that just could not happen, and that was the most important election of our lifetime. It was hyped up to be the most important election of our lifetime in 2020. I don't think he ultimately would have been able to wield much power. I think it would have been like 2016. I think people would have gotten angry at him. I don't think Elon Musk necessarily buys Twitter, and the Democrats would have been in a far better place. But instead, somehow this whole Trump movement, because it lost in 2020, it was just, it gestated and it grew and it burgeoned and now is clothed in far more power. And there's this crazy irony of that I've struggled to reconcile in my own mind of how is it that the most important election of my lifetime as it was presented to me, the election that the most people voted in terms of participation,
ended up being really bad for the side that won and really great for the side that lost. Could anybody even argue that on the other side of it? I'm not sure they could.
Because fault Obama all you want, right? I think his pragmatic approach in terms of like keeping people under wraps and keeping people like even kilter is probably a better approach to being in the big chair. Whereas, there's people that I feel like maybe it's just a matter of culture today. But you feel like a win gives you the right to do and listen to your most extreme supporters in the things that they do. Like whatever you want to say about extreme left, there was a lot of signaling from the Biden admin to check off boxes for that side, right? And I feel like you're going to get the same thing, and you're going to continue to get the same thing with Trump, while he still does the things that are important to him as well outside of that base. The interesting thing, I just realized that when he said Trump said he won't admit that he lost 2020, how much LeVar Ball and Donald Trump have in common. They both, their slogan, never lost. Never lost. We need a pod with LeVar and Donald Trump, man.
I mean, I think that they see things eye to eye.
Yes,
and
very much so.
I mean, that is the selection bias for history, not the selection bias, but the selection pressure of the people who will make history are going to be insane. That's just how it, unfortunately, perhaps that's how it goes. Great. And I say great, not as a moral judge. I'm talking about great men of history as an impact, right? You're not going to get a Napoleon who's going to be a mild-mannered, completely practical, hear everybody's perspective and worry about, it's going to be that tech ethos of move fast and break things.
Yeah.
And they're going to be powered by a certain measure of grandiosity. And I think that I have an understanding of that. I have an understanding that it can go very poorly, but I also understand if you look throughout history, that's just the way that it's gone. And I think a lot of people in this modern era that we consider ourselves in, because anybody in their era considers it modern, it's that Fukuyama thing of thinking that history was over, and that's over. And now it's time for technocracy, and it's time for Tony Blair, and it's time for Obama, and it's time for consideration and deliberation. And the Trump phenomenon is a reminder. Nope, history is just mostly defined by very ambitious, crazy people who will never admit to defeat, forging forth and acting upon these nations. That's just how it goes.
They have no shame. LeVar, I don't think you can shame LeVar Ball. He is so prideful and believes in his visions that he will never admit to failure. Everything he's done was planned out. Like it's a very, he's a very braggadocious gentleman. I respect what he's done as a man and raising his kids and all that stuff. And Trump, not to say that LeVar Ball equals Trump, but Trump personality wise is he has a similar personality in terms of what he sets his mind to and what he wants. He's going to tell himself that is the reality, and he's going to figure out a way to make it happen. And his enemies are the worst and most horrible people in the world, at least publicly. He makes them out to be that way. So yeah, it's an interesting dynamic going on. The thing I'm curious about is where do we land on the rule of law when it comes to Trump? Because it almost seems like he's like, none of this shit matters, right? Like, I mean, I don't know if he's going to take things to an extreme to where, it absolutely puts us in serious harm's way. But what I do wonder is if it sets a precedent that if it's a slippery slope that we can never come back from. So basically like, hey, Trump was already pushing the line. He's going down this road of saying, I'm going to do what I want. I'm this guy and I can follow things this way. I can give pardons for people that have been convicted. I can do whatever. These are things that presidents have always had power for. But there was always this whole respect of, I can't do that, even though I can do it. Whereas Trump is saying, I can do it because I can do it. And I wonder how that impacts future people in that chair.
Well, I think what's
If there's going to be
tricky,
a worse version of that in the future.
yeah, I think what's tricky is there might be a hunger for that, not for whatever he wants to do specifically, but I think part of what's happened is there's been a reaction to the cumbersome nature of the various layers of authority and how getting anything done just seems impossible. And then you pass a law and then a judge says, oh, that it can't work. But then another judge says it can. And I'm oversimplifying all of this because I'm not a lawyer. But I wonder if there's this, I don't think people want to be ruled by a dictator. I don't think they want that. But I do think they maybe hunger for an executive who says, this is what's happening, and then that is what changes. And as much as there's this preached idea that the beauty of the system is that it's so hard to get things done, and that's the beauty of the constitutional system, I do wonder if at a certain point there's fatigue with that, and that's part of what's happened. I don't know. I know people listening to this might think, why do we want to hear these two guys? They're not experts on any of this. We're just trying to sort it out. We're trying to make sense of it. I'm trying to make sense of the culture mostly, Nate. I mean, it was interesting to me. I've said it a few different times that there weren't really players in any sport under 20 men. I mean, WNBA is a different deal, who were supporting the Democratic candidate. And that seemed like a new thing. As somebody who observes the cultural space in sports, what do you think is going to happen downstream of this? Do you think people are going to get into it with Trump like Steph and LeBron did back in the day? Or do you think that we're living now in an era where politics is compartmentalized away from the athletic space? Because that's what it's looking like right now.
I do think that players, as you've mentioned before, many players are much more conservative in some of their views than they're able to share publicly, right? So I think you've gotten into that before, and understand that they're smart enough not to say certain things online because they know that they're going to get backlash from it, unless you're like Kyle Kuzma, who just doesn't care and says whatever he just says red.
But even there, I totally forgot that he did that until you brought that up, and then I went, oh yeah, he's shared some takes. Yes, but you were saying,
yeah. So you have that dynamic, and then I also think there was a dynamic that we just explained earlier, like how I felt in 2016 because of what we were told, that we were on the verge of fascism. This guy is Hitler. He's whatever. And people live through it. And the players included have experienced that. And then they've also seen the, I don't know how I would phrase it, but just the cultural shift in how anything they possibly could have done wrong can be elevated quickly in the, it's almost like gotcha. You're supposed to treat people this way and you didn't treat them that way kind of thing. Perfect example is the kicker that you documented from
Bucker. Harrison Bucker.
Exactly. You think players aren't paying attention to that and understanding that the side that they're supposed to be supporting just automatically defaults to trying to end someone's career and life and whatever else based off of, this is just the way it's supposed to be. Anytime an accusation comes to the forefront, you automatically did it. You're guilty.
Oh, I thought you were talking about Harrison Bucker. I mean, Matt Ariza was the one who was accused there are various, special teamer controversies over the past few years. Ariza, he was out of SDSU and he was called Punt God because he just incredible talent. Just these booming punts, and he got drafted by the Buffalo Bills. And there's an accusation he participated in a brutal gang rape at a frat party at SDSU. And there was this social media outrage, a media outrage. People were horrified by details of the allegations in the lawsuit, right? There's this thing. There's almost a legal literacy in media that's lacking, where a lawsuit will happen and everybody will react to the lawsuit as though because it's written, it definitely happened. And so the Bills cut him. He's out of the league. And the prosecutors from San Diego announced at some point that there was video of the incident. They reviewed everything, and they cannot press charges because he did not do what he was accused of, at the very least. And it made kind of a ripple. People barely cared about it. I wrote about it. People were not nice when I wrote about it. But then Dan Wetzel at Yahoo wrote about it. And eventually he was allowed back into the NFL after, man, was he gone 2 seasons or 1 season? I can't remember. But now he's on the Chiefs and nobody cares, and it's all fine. But that was a situation where there was a rush to judgment, guilty until proven innocent. And even after the innocence was proven, you're still guilty to a certain extent in some pockets of media. And yeah, I do think players observe that sort of thing and understand that there's this narrative of who's always correct and who's always the victim when it's in dispute. And I'm gonna make another point on that, and you can take this one or leave this one. When it comes to players and women, their perspective on women, I think, is sometimes a little bit different from a normal person's, because they do sometimes interact with women who are perhaps not as morally upstanding as your mother, dear listener. they interact with women who might have designs on their finances and might be contriving a way to trap them. And if you don't believe me, you can read some of the work of Brittany Renner, who has turned over a new leaf in her life, but that's neither here nor there. So when they're hearing that in all these instances, it's definitely the man is guilty and the woman is totally innocent, I think a lot of athletes, let's say, might be skeptical. That's how I'll put it, Nate.
Yeah, as soon as I knew you were going to bring up Brittany, and I was like, I'm still disappointed before she supposedly turned over her new leaf as a good Islamic woman that she did not come on. I've always wanted to see Ethan and Brittany interview.
Brittany Renner on this podcast still. So if anybody has a connection to her, knows how to communicate with her, this is a woman who basically wrote a book on how to trap an athlete and was no less successful doing so after giving the whole spiel about it. But yes, Nate.
Yeah,
I was asking.
Yeah, I think that can play into it, and this is stuff that no one's going to say. They're not going to say publicly or whatever. But yeah, they are targeted in some ways, and then in other ways they participate in it. And a lot of times it's a market, and I couldn't even imagine, especially in the social media age, where there are no barriers. Anyone that wants to unless you turn your direct messages off on all your social media platforms, anyone that wants to reach you, they can reach you. So yeah, they are targeted. No judgment whatsoever. Just put it this way, but the idea that someone has been in a category similar to Brittany Renner, and been I don't know, is it an Instagram model, or you've heard stories that, you never know who to believe when Gilbert Arenas is telling a story, but you've heard stories from Gilbert Arenas from back when he was playing in the league in early 2000s, that a woman that was popular at that time is 40 years old now and marrying a younger NBA star that's 20 years, basically the same age as her son. That kind of gives you a glimpse of the dynamic that goes on there, right? I think players are that could be playing into not just the automatic check the box belief system that is pushed by the far left, right? Which is anything a woman says, you're supposed to believe it. And that is not necessarily true. The way our legal system works, just because it's written on a piece of paper and submitted as a lawsuit, doesn't mean it's actually true. You have to go through a process, as I'm forgetting the kicker's name again, but as we experienced with him.
Ariza. Well, and Derrick Rose, I think in the NBA was a situation where back then, I don't remember if that happened square in the middle of Me Too, but there was a lot of media.
It did. It 100% did.
Yeah, and there's a lot of media assumption that this is a bad guy. He's effectively guilty. Look at this. Look at what's written out right here. And it was okay. So that's a good one to bring up, actually, because there was, and it's now going to be forgotten, this shift within some pockets of sports media that we need to now treat Derrick Rose like he's a bad guy because he's being accused of this by an ex-lover of his. And in the league, I think there was a certain under the surface reaction because people love Derrick Rose.
They do.
Not every player in the league is well liked or thought of as a good guy, especially among superstars. And Derrick Rose was somebody where maybe he has flaws, maybe he has faults, but teammates and coaches just loved him. Ron Adams with the Warriors, old sage Ron Adams just loved Derrick Rose. And so there was this under the surface sense back then that Derrick Rose is getting railroaded and I can't talk about it. And I'm not supposed to say anything about it. This guy I know, I'm making the argument that they're talking about and the way they're making it behind the scenes, but this guy I know to be a great guy is being pilloried and they're trying to drive him out of the league. And it's not even a situation, by my recollection, that's a criminal case. I think it was a civil case.
It was.
And ultimately it was a case that he won, but that was an example of something within the NBA context, at least, that I think spurred some skepticism.
There are examples of dudes doing bad stuff. We've seen it with we've seen it with I don't want to get the Bridges mixed up.
Oh yeah,
not Mikal Bridges, but Miles Bridges in the domestic violence, and we've seen the video of it. And obviously, we don't have the full context of their relationship and whatever else. But still, at the end of the day, a man that size should not be beating on a woman that.
But
right?
That almost speaks to the chasm between the athlete culture and some of the fans and media, because Bridges, best I can tell, did something absolutely horrific that in a perfect world teammates would have disavowed, but they didn't. And I felt like that was a shock to many people, but it spoke to this chasm of perspective.
I think that many do behind the scenes. I know for a fact that many do behind the scenes. They just can't. There's a brotherhood thing. They'll talk shit with each other about stuff that's happening on the court and what your game is like, and you don't really care about basketball, or the kind of stuff like Draymond Green will say, right? But they're never going the brotherhood thing, like breaking that publicly, even with a horrific situation like that. It's not real. You don't really see guys step out in that way. Then when it comes to back to the Derrick Rose situation, however you feel about that, the reason the players love Derrick Rose is because he's genuine. Whatever his public bedroom life or whatever it is like, that is really like, we're not privy to that. We're not in the middle of it. We don't know what goes on there. But his persona, dealing with people one-on-one, dealing with them as teammates and groups, whatever, he's what everyone always says is he's one of the most genuine people they've ever come across in the league. And that's why they like him so much. So the idea that, he's getting caught, like this genuine dude that's already been through so much with his ACL issues and everything else, is kind of getting railroaded in their view, right? Like that's why you have that pushback there.
Yeah, and there's this other weird aspect to talk about with the Derrick Rose thing, which we talk about anything. So we'll say things other people won't say. I think one of the issues that was not discussed in the aftermath of the Derrick Rose accusations was that the exonerating explanation still grossed out media members, which is basically that a group of men had sex with one woman, which I think is more normal in certain milieus in athlete culture than, say, in journalist culture. That's just not, as far as I know. I mean, I have not been on the NBA circuit in a while, Nate, so maybe things have changed. Maybe that's more normal. I
don't even know if
those in the press box.
The funny thing is, I don't really have stories from my NBA career about that. But I had friends that played college football, and it felt like more of a
college football thing.
Football thing. It's a very common thing, and it's not. I mean, I think people looking at it from the outside in would say that those people are bad. But if it's a consensual situation, how can you label them bad, right? Like if the person hasn't been drugged, isn't drunk, isn't whatever else, then I don't know if you can. It just, I think culturally is something that happens at that level and at those ages that it's hard for a normie to wrap their head around. Right.
Yeah.
Like I've never experienced that. Like I don't want to speak for you. I've never experienced, I have no problem to say I've never experienced that.
Yeah.
So that just because I haven't experienced that and that's not my norm doesn't mean that it makes it wrong for someone else to operate that way, especially when it's all consenting adults. So
I just feel like there is this unarticulated sense of that's gross and that's wrong. But according to my belief system, I am, non-judgmental about people's proclivities. So I'm not going to articulate that. But secretly, I'm going to go, which I think I do have some measure of in response to it. I just don't necessarily think that the participants are bad people. It's more... Man, I don't understand that. It's like when I watch somebody do travel for food shows and people are eating something and I'm going, I don't even understand. You're going to eat the undigested stuff from the cow's guts? That's crazy. That's how I feel about it, Nate.
Hey, to each their own. Everybody has their thing, and everyone has their thing and their preferences, and especially in their private lives, as long as it's not violating someone else, who are we to judge, right? Like we're all just trying to get through this life. So yeah, that's kind of the way I look at it. But we're on House of Strauss, so I can say whatever I want. But me personally, I think the reason something like that would always be a turnoff to me is I just don't want another dude around while I'm doing. No. Like I'm just not interested in that. But that it feels like, especially when you talk about it from a football team perspective, it's almost like a bonding for them.
Yeah,
in a lot of ways.
It seems like that's part of it. As an aside, I've found it really interesting how Julian Edelman has just been podcasting more and more about the Patriots culture, and football teams are just different. They're a lot different from NBA teams. The culture is much different. And apparently it was even more different before they reformed their CBA. And so they were just around each other for months and months and months. And I'll give a shout out to Julian Edelman if you want to get some sort of insight, because as much as I think that I've got an understanding to a degree of athlete culture, there are just such different pockets of it and how it works. And the authority of the coach, for instance, in an NFL situation, far different from an NBA situation, to say nothing of sexual proclivities. So, Nate, you've been following the whole TikTok drama. I feel like you've got thoughts on it and thoughts on our culture. I've been following it to a degree. This whole, it's banned, but it's not banned. People are going to be angry if it's banned. The young people will revolt if it's banned. I think I'll start you off with this. This is, to be clear, not your tweet, but a tweet you have retweeted. I want to be clear about that.
Yes, sir.
From Zaid Jalani. When India banned TikTok, people moved on very quickly, and as far as I can tell, there was no political consequences whatsoever. These apps aren't particularly innovative and just make money the same way slot machines do. That's your jumping off point. Discuss as you will.
I agree with him 100%. All they're going to end up doing is let's say the TikTok Reels format is not going away. Between TikTok, YouTube Shorts, and Reels, and maybe Elon Musk starts his own, version of this, that feed based, quick cut video is not going away. So all that's going to happen is more people are going to spend more time on YouTube Shorts and Reels or whatever else comes about. The difference is, what does it actually mean in terms of our interactions with China and the way they approach media versus the way we approach media? They say no American social media companies can be there. We cannot have apps there. When I've traveled to China, between 2015 and 2019, I was going twice a year, sometimes to China for business purposes. And I would have to have a VPN the entire time if I wanted to access content. And before VPNs were as safe and reliable as they are now, I used to work with Kevin Durant in the early 2010s, And he would travel to China for big Nike tours, and I would stay behind so that I could get access to the content being sent to me versus, struggling with internet and not being able to connect to the platforms, and him being able to report all the stuff that was happening over there. So they've been closed. The Great Firewall, I don't know when the Great Firewall was founded, but they figured out pretty quickly we need to keep that influence out if we want our country to operate the way that we want it to operate. Whereas here, it's like we can't look at their side as having ill intentions. And it's obviously just a free speech thing, and we're trying to take a free speech platform away, when there's plenty of places that you can go and have your pulpit to say whatever it is that you want to say, put your creativity anywhere that you want to be. The interesting thing about it, though, is going to be how Trump navigates this, right? So I believe when I was listening I haven't read the actual law, but I was listening to Ben Thompson and Andrew Sharp on Sharp Tech explain the rules for the 90-day delay. And I believe that you had to have actual proof that there was a sale to a US-based entity pending. And obviously that's not the case here. So my question is there anyone in Congress that's going to step up and go, hey, man, like, this is what the law says. This is the way that we're supposed to operate, and we have to respect rule of law. Whereas Trump is just basically saying, I'm in power now, and we should give them 90 days to figure it out, or whatever it was that he said, 70 days to figure it out, even though the law says that these are the things that have to happen in order for there to be a delay. So I'm really interested in that dynamic more than anything.
Well, I'm not smart enough to know legally what the implications are, or, for instance, if even I narrowly would like to see this banned, what that opens up, what the slippery slope might be. I don't know, but I am intrigued by the argument. I do agree with you and Jelani that people will just move on to a different thing. I'm intrigued by this idea that there are people who are so addicted to TikTok that this will be a massive shift in their lives and they will be angry about it. Maybe I just think that's got to be momentary. TikTok's got to be a placeholder for something else, right? Or am I naive because I'm an aging millennial and this isn't how I interface with the world?
There's going to be another platform that they go to. It's just spending time. I definitely think COVID was a cultural shift in terms of the way people spend their time. They spend more time. They spend more time at home than they did before. People getting together and congregating and planning things and doing stuff outside of the home has been more difficult since COVID. I think I listened to a pod earlier where there was someone was a consultant in the media industry was saying that television time watched has gone up. It's just that it's not through linear. So they're consuming more content through the apps, through YouTube. YouTube is like the app on televisions for a lot of people. And you're having that experience. My wife, the main thing she consumes on our television is her YouTube. Like, she tells me, if I'm logged into YouTube, don't watch anything on here because I don't want my algorithm messed up. Right. So people will gravitate and find the content they want and time to spend watching and wasting time on whatever the platform is of their choice. Or whatever platform is available at that time. Right. So, TikTok's not going to be there. They're going to put that time somewhere else and life will go on. Yeah.
I'd be inclined to agree. And Reels seems quite similar. And there's something to TikTok that it is like a short acting drug. And I've been fascinated by the weird aesthetic where somebody will do a looping song or performance where it ends abruptly, like right in the middle of somebody saying something. It's just like the aesthetic of it is interesting. It seems designed to just leave you wanting more in that way uniquely versus a YouTube video I might watch where it has a beginning and an ending. And I feel like, it gave me something to think about.
Yeah. The production wise on these reels and shorts and TikToks is the trick I see is they start it with a question and where they cut off gives the answer. So it's like a circle. It's a circle back. Yeah. Like it's just
that
like,
one. No, I've definitely noticed that one.
Yeah. So
how to make a ribeye using how
Yeah.
to make a ribeye steak
Yeah.
using only the sun. And then,
Yeah.
and that's how I learned how to make a ribeye at the end of it. Yeah.
Yeah. There's all
And
kinds
so
of
it
little tricks and
loops.
things that they do in order to make that stuff happen. So yeah, it's interesting. I am not a cat person myself. I put this on my Twitter earlier, but I saw a very, very funny cat video that I won't go into describing what was in it. I shared it with my wife on Instagram, and I'm being inundated with cat videos. They've determined that I love cats, which is actually the opposite. I don't like cats at all. So that's the world we're in. It's just like they're looking for that one thing. They're like, oh, we got him. We figured out his hook and what he loves, and we're just going to sit here and roll the slot machine all day long. But they lost me because they spam me with cats, so I closed the app.
Yeah, I wonder, they've got to get smarter about that down the road and allow you to have some sort of authority over your own algorithm where you can just say to it and go, I don't like cats, I do like this. And the problem though is that they want to get into who you really are versus who you want to be in your own mind, and that they're more interested in the former as opposed to the latter. And if we're telling them, it's almost like when people are asked what sort of person they're interested in dating, and it sounds so much better versus what they actually want. People saying that they want a good sense of humor and kind, but they don't actually want that. They want what we actually want. But I would like a service that made me able to actually have some sort of authorship in what they're feeding me. But who knows? I'm sure somebody's working on it.
Yeah, that's counter to I feel like that's counter to all these platforms think. Like they really feel like the algorithm is it, and it's going to, if it makes a mistake, they want it to, figure out that it made a mistake. And that's the machine learning aspect of it versus having someone tell you, and they might not actually know what they want. It's like what Don Draper would say, right? Like these,
we tell them
we tell them what they want, right? So it's the algorithm. It's algorithm Don Draper basically is what they're trying to create. Yeah.
It's got to be a strange machine to operate if you're the Chinese government and you're trying to give people what they want at this base visceral level and propagandize in a way that benefits the nation of China. I don't know how you somehow reconcile that. Maybe there are certain ways to do it, but I'm sure they've thought about it in some measure of depth. I'm not certain how it all goes.
I mean, it's, obviously I am not a coder and an engineer and all that, but I think from a logical perspective, it's not like they actually have to seed content in there. They just say in the algo, anything that is negative towards the US, like play that up, because as you've covered many times on this pod, we are a mimetic species. So you start to see things
control
more often.
Control the algo, control the populace.
Exactly. That's really, to me, is the fear and what, in theory, what people should be concerned with a foreign entity having control over.
Well, I'm shocked at the extent to which it's true, even if I believed in its truth, because I even remember 4 years ago, 5 years ago, saying, look, I'm convinced, because I was looking at Twitter and the crazy news hysterias people were reacting to and how they would just receive whatever was popping in the algo as the news. There's a Karen in Central Park. That is the news. And that's the most important thing in all of the world today. And I remember saying, if a conservative person took over Twitter, all of the sense of what's important would shift, and people would be just really hopped up about crimes committed by illegal immigrants. I didn't know. Even seeing it happen shocks me. Even if I said it and I believed it at some level, it's shocking to me the extent to which, if you control Twitter, you just shift America's Overton window over this way through selection and curation and whatever else. And I don't know how to feel about that, Nate, as somebody who believes in free speech and free will and everything else, to know that whoever is in control of a select few of these technologies effectively controls our minds. But it appears to be the case.
Yeah, that's what's interesting about the Twitter case. There's two things for me. Number one, Elon is say what you want to say about his personality and whatever else. there are people that look at Elon as an aspirational figure. So not only did he buy the platform, but he loves and utilizes the platform very frequently. So
Yeah.
you have him as this thing that influences people. And I see it's so interesting because I also see very powerful, or not even like they're not at the tippy top of tech, but people that have made a lot of money in tech that I'm aware of, that it's almost like they make sure that they're publicly agreeing with what Elon says, and it's out there, and they almost always respond to anything that he posts because they feel like it's almost like they have to, and he's so powerful that you have to have that kind of interaction. So you have that aspect. Yeah. And then you have the algorithm aspect where he probably can amplify his own tweets more than give his more tweets more resonance than anyone else, right? Or X or whatever, posts, whatever they say now. I still call it Twitter. Sorry, Elon. Yeah. And then also in terms of elevating more things from a conservative perspective, or the candidate that he wants and all that, which is interesting because the world kind of sees, maybe not the world, but I think US and especially the younger generation kind of sees social media as the town square. But the town square doesn't have an algo dictating who is able to be heard. Maybe if there's a microphone being passed around and the mayor of the city goes, you get to talk, you get to talk, you get to talk, you get to talk. And we're going to hear your perspectives. And they're all people that he trusts.
There's no just free town square. That's why.
That's what Twitter was before the algo feed, Ethan. And obviously it was more. Yeah. It was, they let, there was a free for all for links. So that's why the news media loved it. And, if whoever you were following, that's what your feed was. Now it's like people, I try not to fall into the For You feed, but I think I'm sure if we looked under the hood, the majority of people probably use their For You feed for Twitter.
Especially because it defaults. Because it defaults there too.
Yep.
No, and I remember the way back in the days you're talking about. You're not talking about the Elon takeover. You're talking about like way back.
I'm talking about when I first started on Twitter, like 09, 2010. It was just reverse chronological order with no real algo approach applied to it.
It wasn't perfect, but it was more civil, weirdly too. And people would have debates and arguments, and it didn't feel like this pile-on culture that took it over later on before Elon bought it. And I think there's this anxiety of influence because, to bring it back to the topic at the start, Trump wins in 2016, and then there's all this rage from journalists and liberals over Facebook and Twitter for enabling it all. And the issue is that whoever is in control, whoever has the levers, why did I pronounce it like in British? I don't know. The levers of power for the social media companies, there are outcomes that are possible or not possible based on how they act and based on what they reward and based on what they intervene as. And there's no way to do it there's no such thing as neutrality. I mean, you should aspire, and I personally think you should aspire to neutrality, but there's no actual way to attain neutrality. Just like my son would say, there's no way to attain perfect. And it just becomes very tempting to start being an arbiter towards a certain outcome. And it just seems like it's impossible to run these institutions without being an arbiter towards a certain end. And we're just now living through the arbiters wanting different ends is what's happening.
Hey, I don't want to sound super liberal. I'm liberal or Democrat or whatever you want to say. But it's really
illegal
interesting.
Now, Nate.
It's illegal. I'm going to be burned at the stake. But it's interesting that our main, obviously television and traditional media still has a pretty big platform in the country, but where, especially for our youth, where everything has transferred is to these algo-based feeds. And when it came to media and spectrum and whatever you got access to as a media company, you had to apply to get a license, and it was regulated. There is zero regulation of algorithms. I don't even know if our leaders have a full understanding of how these things actually work. And it's just basically when you have a company like Elon owns Twitter, he's basically a dictator of Twitter. He determines what his algo is going to be. And there is no analysis from a government perspective of what that means and what you can and can't do. And then even though it's a publicly traded company, Facebook, it starts and ends with what Zuckerberg wants, right? Like he's got a board that's all going to do whatever he wants, right? So it starts and ends with what he wants. And it's just an interesting time to be in where we had, I mean, I guess it's, was it Hearst that Citizen Kane was based off of? I think it was Hearst.
William Randolph Hearst.
Yeah, I think that's what
Rosebud and whatnot. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, we had that pushback of like, you shouldn't be able to control all these papers and all this media, and we should have some kind of regulation over this. And the same thing when it came to communications law around broadcast television. You have to operate a certain way. You have to show nightly news. There are just all these different things that you had to do where it's like almost a free for all now. And I wonder if we're ever going to have a pullback in that regard. And if it's even possible, is it just a slippery slope if you start to try to regulate algos?
Yeah. I mean, my sense of it is that maybe it should be regulated, but I wouldn't trust anybody to do the regulation.
So what's and this is probably something that like a guy like Ben is probably better at analyzing than the two of us sitting here. But
what's the great Ben Thompson? Yes.
What like how do you compare and contrast the regulatory system of the broadcast television era and what was put in place? How much can overlap with this internet algo feed based era? And is it even possible to regulate it all? Or is it just a disservice to everyone to try and do that?
I mean, my intuition would be the second, but obviously he's thought about it more. It's strange how much regulation there was. I know people were wondering why can't the NFL play on a Friday? And it had to do with some arcane rule that it would overlap with Friday Night Lights in high school football. So therefore you can't have it, which is kind of funny that withstood the test of time for as long as it did. My intuition is it's probably best left alone, but because who knows what a mess would be created if suddenly from the top down, the feds really got invested in it. It seemed like it wasn't a good outcome when they were noodling around behind the scenes of what could be said on Twitter and what should be banned on Twitter. But that was also from like when you look at, sorry to interrupt, but that was also from a perspective of, that was a very politically driven interruption of that. Basically like, hey, we are like Biden administration's in power now. So you need to make sure that these things aren't said. And we're pressuring you because there was an article written about, the president's son that we don't like. So get it the fuck off the platforms like that. A regulatory system that isn't necessarily, I don't know how you get to that. It isn't necessarily blowing with whatever political winds are happening is kind of where, like our television for the most part, and my entire life of watching broadcast television, I can't think of things that changed based off of presidential regime that came in. It just was the stability around it, right? Whereas what we're talking about, it's like, Zuckerberg's going to kiss up to the Biden administration and do whatever they want because they're in power at this time. And now he's switching up and he's doing everything differently because a new regime is in power. Well, there was I remember when Rush Limbaugh got big, there was this on the liberal side, a freak out about how this was something that was burgeoning and unfair and something needed to be done by it. And there have been conversations about equal time according to FCC rules. But yeah, you're right. There is no sense that the winner of an election would fundamentally change the sense-making apparatus of the nation and how we consume information. That's something that we did not grow up with. That's something that we have right now. That's something that I cannot possibly predict as far as how it's going to go. But I my intuition is best left alone, but I have zero faith at the same time that left alone is necessarily going to lead to great outcomes. And at the same time, I'm probably more in favor of banning TikTok, but maybe that's anti-free speech. We're not going to figure it all out. I'm going to have to go right now. This has been great as always, Nate. Nate,
Yes.
What do you want to plug for us? What should we be on the lookout for? I suspect it might have something to do with the Dick's Sporting Goods.
Yeah, we have a startup called Move Insoles, which is a athletic performance insole brand that is utilized all across professional sports and college sports. And we actually have launched over the last couple of months our first retail partnership with Dick's Sporting Goods, the largest sporting goods provider or retailer in the U.S. We are in, I know we're in at least 20 to 30 stores right now, but overall we'll be in 81 stores over the next month total. And we're hoping we're going to be in 500 plus what they refer to as doors in within the next year. So, you can check us out there, or you can also follow us on anywhere on social, even TikTok, even though I don't do much there, on at Move Insoles. And you can also check us out on our website and web store at move.one.
I am a minor investor in Move, so I should disclose that. But
Yeah.
I'll also say that I wear them all the time, and they're super comfortable. And yes, I'm cutting a free ad. I want to show it on the YouTube, but I need to buy some more because it's like been darkened by my sock. I need to get some new.
You're my favorite customer. When I see it's like you like them that much that it gotten to that point. So
I mean, I need to replenish, but no, it's. I give my full endorsement to Move and my full endorsement to Nate as a thinker and reasonable pontificator on all matters, sports, business, politics, whatever you want. Thanks so much for stopping by.
Appreciate you, man.